My name is Peggy Lee, and I am the Director of Chapters at the American Constitution Society. I am so excited and humbled to welcome you to this important call. If you attended part 1 of this event on June 30th, welcome back. And if you're new to this program, welcome. We are excited to have you here. Just like in part 1, we hope that you'll engage with our speakers and other attendees using the chat society. I am so excited and humbled. Apologies for the delay. The live stream is working. So if you're watching on the live stream, I just heard myself on the live stream. So just like part 1, we hope that you'll engage with our speakers and other attendees using the chat box and ask questions using the question and answer feature on Zoom. So for those who may not know, the American Constitution Society is the nation's largest progressive legal network. We believe that the Constitution is of the people, by the people, and for the people. We interpret the Constitution based on its text and against the backdrop of history and lived experience. Through a diverse nationwide network of progressive lawyers, law students, judges, scholars, and many others, we work to uphold the Constitution in the 21st century by ensuring that the law is a force for protecting our democracy and the public interest and for improving people's lives. We are also a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so we do not support political parties or candidates for office. As ACS President Russ Feingold recently noted, far too many people in this country do not feel seen, protected, or comfortable with our laws. Our work is not just about the academic aspects of the law or a battle over constitutional theory. It is about the reality of what the Constitution and the law means for people on the ground. We're committed to fighting for a progressive future, a future where all Black lives matter. A few upcoming ACS and events and opportunities I just want to share with y'all. So number 1, election season volunteer opportunities. We need volunteers this election season to serve as poll workers and help with election protection. Poll workers are essential to protect the vote, and localities across the country are experiencing critical poll worker shortages. If you're interested in volunteering on election day or leading up to election day, let us know. Email lcemails@acslaw.org to find out more. I'll also put it into the chat box once I'm done speaking. We also have 3 regional convenings coming up this fall. They're going to cover a range of topics, including voting rights, contested elections, criminal justice, qualified immunity, wrongful convictions, racial justice, the right to protest, police reform, cannabis law, and the Second Amendment. We are working on publishing that information, so please check back to acslaw.org for updates. We'll also plan on sending an email out once we have those dates and programs confirmed. Last thing I'll note is that ACS is hosting a virtual book club. This will be the first one. It's going to be on September 10th with Professor Paul Butler on his book, Choke Cold. Professor Butler will be in conversation with Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. Following that discussion, members of the ACS Board of Academic Advisors will lead small breakout groups to facilitate discussion. I will say there is currently a long wait list for that event, but you can sign up for that wait list and learn more about it on our ACS event page. And to make sure you find out about these events moving forward, you can sign up for ACS emails. It is at the bottom of our homepage, which is acslaw.org. And if you want to engage more with ACS, you can reach out to me and others using campus@acslaw.org. So before we move on to the main program, I would like to thank our co-hosts, Professor Michele Goodwin and the National Black Law Students Association, for working to put together both part 1 and part 2 of this much needed discussion. Thank you also to our incredible speakers for taking the time to share with us their perspectives, stories, wisdom, and expertise. And an extra big shout out just to Professor Michele Goodwin. She's worked tirelessly to bring these events together. We so value and appreciate her vision and all the work that she put into these events, and even just providing us with the honor to work with her and all the speakers and others on this program. So I'm going to give a quick introduction on all of our incredible speakers. These biographies are also listed on the ACS event page, which you can find at acslaw.org/events. All right. Professor Jody Armour is the Roy P. Crocker Professor of Law in the University of Southern California Gould School of Law. He is a widely published scholar and popular lecturer. He's also a Soros Justice Senior Fellow of the Open Society Institute's Center on Crime, Communities, and Culture. Rachel Barnes is the chair of the National Black Law Students Association. She's a 3L JD MBA student at the University of Virginia School of Law. Dean Danielle M. Conway is the dean and Donald J. Farage Professor of Law at the Pennsylvania State University Dickinson Law. She's a leading expert in procurement law, entrepreneurship, and intellectual property law. Her scholarly agenda and speeches have focused on, among other areas, advocating for public education and for actualizing the rights of marginalized groups. Professor Michele Goodwin is the Chancellor's Professor of Law and Director of the Center for Biotechnology and Global Health Policy at the University of California, Irvine. She is a nationally recognized advocate for civil liberties and civil rights and is at the forefront of health policy discourse. Professor Tracy Mears is the Walton Hale Hamilton Professor of Law and founding director of the Justice Collaboratory at Yale Law School. Professor Mears is a nationally recognized expert on policing in urban communities. Her research focuses on understanding how members of the public think about their relationship with legal authorities. Christopher Williams received his JD from the University of California Irvine School of Law and is currently a Neubauer Fellow in the Department of Sociology at the University of Chicago. His research interests are in highlighting interlocking oppressions that disproportionately impact vulnerable populations. Marquisa Wentz is the vice chair of the National Black Law Students Association. She's a concurrent degree student completing her JD at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, William H. Bowen School of Law, and her Master of Public Service at the University of Arkansas Clinton School of Public Service. I will now pass the mic over to your moderator, Professor Michele Goodwin.
Thank you so much for that, Peggy. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here with such great colleagues who have taken the time to be with us this evening, and also with an audience that is so keen to engage at such a deeper level about Black lives and Black lives on law school campuses and also beyond. When we first began this conversation, it was in the wake of Breonna Taylor's death and the death of George Floyd, their murders. And it came about because of the urgent pain and the cry that we heard across the country by Black folks, because this was not something that was new. We saw this time and time again, oftentimes captured by police video camera, the killing, the deaths of African Americans. And so a language about anti-Blackness has been taking place now. And it's very interesting because we're in a space now where we're finally beginning to recognize the kinds of things that so many have been articulating for so very long, including some of our guests this evening who've been doing pioneering work in the field about race and the criminal justice system and constitutional law and other areas of the law. So this evening, we continue to build on the first conversation. And in the wake of the first conversation, what we learned was that there were so many students of color, so many Black students across the country who were concerned because there's so few Black faculty on their campuses, concerned because they feel there aren't the adequate resources that are devoted to the needs that Black students have, concerned because there are courses that are taught that pretty much render Black people invisible, and so much more to talk about. We had lots of questions and lots of comments come about from the last session that we did, and I imagine the same will be true for this evening. Joining us this evening, as with the first time, are our wonderful leadership from the National Black Law Students Association. Marquisa Wentz, the vice chair, and Rachel Barnes, the chair. And so without further ado, I'm actually going to turn the program over to them because we want to hear and get this program framed around the concerns that they are hearing. And then I will turn it over to my colleagues who join me tonight, and I am so excited to be in company with them. So Marquisa, why don't I turn it over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm honored again to be here with you all and excited to share what Nabalsa has planned to continue to support the numerous Black students across the country that have stood up and continue to fight alongside the amazing folks in the community in response to the injustices that we continue to see in our nation. As mentioned, Nabalsa has taken heed to the push and the outcry of Black students everywhere, and this desire to get involved and to stay involved in these fights that are happening. And in response to this, we not only issued a statement, but we are launching Nabalsa United, which is a task force and an initiative to involve our local membership. So non-leadership members of Nabalsa, everyday folks and everyday members on law school campuses to get aligned with one of our task force, either working in increasing the number of law students present, so working with Black law student retention and admission rates. That's one of our task force. Also voting rights and civic engagement and education. That's another task force. And then racial equity, which not only focuses on organizing within the community, but also on law school campuses themselves. So making sure that we continue to allow the space and invite our members and Black law students across the nation to get involved in the fight and get aligned with different organizations that are doing this. So those that are involved or interested in getting involved on one of those task force, please send an email to socialaction@nabalsa.org. We'll put those in the chat box, or just visit our website where the application will be uploaded there as well. It will also be dispersed in our upcoming newsletter. So that's kind of the things that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned early on in this call. But I also want to just speak to the students that are tapping in now, and one, send some encouragement your way. We're going through a period that's unprecedented, a period of change, a period of uncertainty. So I want to remind you all to continue to take care of yourselves throughout this process. Although it's important for us to continue to apply pressure and hold all of our campuses accountable to the many statements that we read throughout this summer and throughout this period, we do want to hold them accountable and continue to apply pressure. But we also have to maintain our mental and spiritual and emotional health throughout this period. So as we're going into this transitional phase, make sure that you tap into the community that's around you. Right now, it is virtual. It may look like a Skype call or a Zoom or a FaceTime, but continue to build and grow your community, not only on your campus and with the folks that you can directly touch, but with the folks elsewhere. There's a lot of folks that are going through similar struggles and challenges, and we don't want you all to go through this alone. Nabalsa is there. There's a lot of different organizations available and willing and able to support you throughout this process as we go into yet another semester, because the grind never stops and school must go on, and we have to secure that JD, but at the same time, we have to take care of ourselves. So I wanted to leave you all with that as well. I'm very excited to see what we have on the docket for this evening and to hear from the amazing folks that we have on this panel. So now I'll pass it on to Rachel.
Thank you, Marquisa. So my vice chair really said it all. Thank you guys to start for having us back for this really important conversation. We're very excited that there was such an outpouring of support and understanding and interest in what we're talking about here, because it is a valuable conversation and one that hasn't been had enough. So we're very excited to be a part of that conversation. When it comes to the framing that Professor Goodwin mentioned, I would say from the law school perspective, one of the biggest concerns we're seeing right now is the undiscussed bias that it can manifest itself in a virtual environment. So for a lot of students, you're already challenged with trying to connect with professors who you don't identify with typically, or being the only person in a classroom who looks like you. And so now in a virtual environment, some of those challenges have been amplified and professors have not necessarily responded, and it's hard to find that support. And even within the law school environment, finding support from your peers. Also within the virtual space, a lot of individuals are staying at home or have unstable home situations, but now the school layer is being thrust upon that, and that's creating its own challenge that some students are bearing more than others. And so that's a big issue that we're seeing, is that students don't feel supported, or this is a very disruptive time, and because of the disproportionate impact on Black and minority students and individuals overall, we're seeing this shift in stressors and concerns, and those are compounded by these new job challenges of seeking positions at firms or in other legal professional capacities, but they're not available anymore because of cuts and changes in the economy. So trying to understand that environment and finding ways to get creative with JDs is another interest that I think law students have, especially because, like we mentioned on the last call, there aren't a lot of Black professors in the legal space, much less generally. And so considering that as a route potentially for the future is something that we'd love to hear more about, because that pipeline isn't very clear and accessible to us all the time. So having that understanding of what it takes, what's the process, what are the challenges that you all have faced, that is something that we would love more information on and hope to address in this call. So Professor Goodwin, I'll pass it on to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you both so very much for informing us about what Nabalsa is up to, but also putting it all in context too, Rachel, about how the pre-existing infrastructural and institutional problems are only magnified during COVID and having to do this work by video, and how that adds further burdens and distancing in many ways. You started us off, and there's so much more to fill in. So I'm going to turn to my colleague, Professor Jody Moore, to get us started.
Thanks. It's great to see the leadership of National Black Law Students Association again. I last saw you the last time we could get together, one of the last times we could get together without the stay-at-home orders and shelter-in-place orders. And it was a fabulous annual gathering. I was proud and honored to keynote. And you recall that it was held in Cincinnati, and I said at the time that it was especially momentous for me that it was happening in Cincinnati, not only because that's where the Underground Railroad came up, and you know, Black people were accused of the pathology of drapetomania for wanting to flee from the South to Cincinnati, you know, so I was basking in my pathological, you know, addiction to freedom there in Cincinnati. But what connected to Black bodies in bondage that brought me there, as you recall, was the fact that I stood there with my dad as a 14-year-old, having had him taken from me when I was 8 years old and thrown in prison for 22 to 55 for possession and sale of marijuana. That I was standing with him as a 14-year-old right across the street from where we met for that convention in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeal, as he was arguing before an en banc panel of judges, literally for his life, in a case I now teach in my criminal law class called Armour versus Salisbury, which stands for the, you would think, pretty common sense proposition that hadn't been as well established for his case, which is why you shepherdize his case now for this proposition, that it's a denial of due process for the state prosecutor, the state who was prosecuted, to lie to the jury to get a conviction, deliberately, intentionally, you know, demonstrably. And so as I was telling that story, you know, there are a lot of downsides to this virtual environment we're in, but one of the upsides is I couldn't share with you the typewriter he used on the cell floor to type up his own writs of habeas corpus and represent himself pro se through the state system and then get kicked over to the federal. But now I'm at home and I can take you to my dad's typewriter that he used to type his way out of 22 to 55 in a prison cell on a cell floor, right there. And that is where I learned the power of language, because all he had between him and a lifetime behind bars, because he was one of them uppity Negroes, you know, so-called niggas that was going to do the full 55, not the lower end, you know, for his bad attitude. The only thing between him and that fate was word work, language, the legal lexicon, right?
It looks like we have Professor Moore. He is, okay, you're back with us.
Okay. Oh, you were spared some of my, I don't know how much you were spared just now, but he found the key to his own cell door in the warden's law books. And so I'm glad I was able to share that with you. It's why I'm a lawyer. I think it's why you're a lawyer. We're all committed to word work. We see word work as our path to justice, and liberation, right? He showed me that words are more than just, I don't know, even communication. They're acts with consequences. They can fling open cell doors. And so when I came to law school, I was worried that learning the legal lexicon would get me brain, kind of snatched, body snatched, indoctrinated. I saw so many people come to law school with aspirations to be public interest lawyers, and there's some data that bears this out, and they go out the other end doing corporate law. I know there's crushing debt, a lot of other explanations, but some of it I worried was learning to think and talk like a lawyer. There may be some corporatization, some loss of touch with your community, for your true and ancient properties, from mastering that language game. And so, and I also heard Audre Lorde's words ringing in my ear: you can never dismantle the master's house with his own tools. And if the legal lexicon is part of his tools, it's been used to historically oppress us and shore up patriarchal, racist domination, then I was worried about that. But my dad kind of disabused me of some of that concern when he said, I hear what you're saying, but I was also able to use that language to open my cell door. So it can be oppressive, but it can also liberate. You can make, he used to like to say, I made my frozen circumstances dance by playing to them their own melody. And that came from the mastery of what we're doing in these classrooms. So I hope that you embrace it like that, and we'll talk some more. But I had that skepticism and distance. I wanted to share that with you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that, Professor Moore. I'm going to pivot to Professor Tracy Mears, someone whom I admire a great deal and who's been path-breaking and pioneering with work that people are now paying attention to in very deep and meaningful ways across the country, involving policing and criminalization in the United States of people of color.
Thanks, Michelle, for that introduction. Thanks for the invitation, Marquisa and Rachel. I really am inspired by all of the work that you all are doing to lead this upcoming generation. And thanks to Jody for sharing what you just shared. I think that Jody Armour and I have been teaching for about the same amount of time. I started teaching at the University of Chicago in 1995. And I'm pretty sure you started teaching in 1995 as well. I remember teaching, before I taught criminal procedure, and I don't teach criminal law as much anymore, but I actually taught remedies way back in the day and professional responsibility, and taught Jody's path-breaking piece, Res Ipsa Loquitur, in my remedies class. It's an honor to be on this panel with everyone, and I'm especially moved by what you shared. Since we're at home, we can share these personal stories. So let me start with one. It's my left. I'm not sure how you guys see it. Right shoulder is a clock. It's his grandfather clock. That clock used to belong to my grandfather, who was born in 1912. He was one of 12 students, Black students at the University of Illinois. And so he graduated from college. And then he got a degree before World War II, fought in World War II in the quote unquote colored regiment where he was an officer, and then went back and got another degree. And this clock has been passed down in our family. He's no longer with us, but the clock was actually purchased by his grandfather, and it was the first thing he bought when after emancipation. And he wanted a marker of time, and it still works. Doesn't work right now, because I need to take it to the clock place in COVID, but it does actually work and still tell time. And he and my grandmother were my inspirational figures. My grandmother was a civil rights activist, and she was responsible for the change of the form of government in Springfield, Illinois, which is the capital of Illinois, to a aldermanic mayor oral representation system, because no Black people for decades had any representation in Springfield. And those of you who really know your deep history know that there was a race massacre in Springfield, Illinois, that actually led to the beginning of the establishment of the NAACP. So we got a lot of deep history here on this panel. My grandmother always told me that my life was not my own, and that I was obligated to use my gifts and talents to help other people, which is why I do what I do. I'm an engineer. I wouldn't say that I have the gift of language that Professor Arbor was speaking about. I'm a math person. I try to fix things. I try to understand things, deconstruct things. I like equations. And so my path to doing the work has been to invest in social science, which I think is something that some of the listeners on this webinar might be interested in. You can do that without having a PhD. I don't have a PhD. I play a social scientist on TV, but because I'm a math kid, I've always been one, I was able to, figure out how to do the statistics, because it turns out that stats is a lot easier than the calculus that I had to do as an engineer. But I actually think, following along the lines that Professor Armour was talking about is, what I'd really like to talk to you all today about is the way to turn what we're facing now into an advantage. So 2 points on that. The way I think about the relationship between the COVID pandemic and policing as an opportunity to understand fundamentally the ways in which the state has failed Black people for literally hundreds of years. But, thinking about it from a social science perspective, my sort of guiding light here is the original sociologist, W.E.B. Du Bois. I rely a lot on that approach and that work, and the way we can actually potentially recover, I'm going to be provocative for a second, the police power for what it should be, which has always been, its formal definition is about legislating for the general welfare of state citizens. And in that way, the police power is the foundation of public schooling, is the foundation of public health. Those are the things that policing should be for, and actually understanding a set of public goods for which citizens are entitled, I think is one of the most important things that we all can be working toward. And that's how I understand certainly Michelle's work and in healthcare. So, so that's one. And then second, on legal academia, I want to say that this moment actually should be something that we can utilize for our benefit, because all of this for so long has been about networks. But when the networks are not made visible to people, they're hard to leverage. And this group is actually relatively small. And so I actually think, with organizers like Marquisa and Rachel, and with a group like ACS, we actually should be able to leverage networks to advance the interests of those who are committed and interested in legal academia to our advantage, frankly. And that's something that I would like to talk about. So Those are my opening remarks, and I look forward to questions.
All right. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Dean Danielle Conway. And for our listening audience, if you have questions, please put those in the Q&A. We will definitely get to them, but this is a time where you can begin doing that. And I'll turn it over to you, Dean.
Thank you so much, Professor Goodwin, and to Vice Chair Wentz and President Barnes and distinguished professors. ACS, thank you for hosting this discussion. And I'm so happy to have joined, especially to follow Professor Mears' remarks, particularly with respect to breaking into the legal academy as a Black and Brown person. It's very interesting that the conversation led that way, because anyone who knows me knows that I have taken the ultimate non-traditional path to legal academy. I did not attend a T14 school. I attended a historically Black college and university, Howard University School of Law, at a time when Howard University, poo-poo rankings, was a fourth tier law school and was struggling with its bar passage statistics. I came in the class when we had close to 60% bar passage. And so the idea of ever teaching in the legal academy did not cross my mind until a professor who looked like me walked into the classroom and began his lecture, Warner Lawson. And I said, after 2 minutes, I am going to be like that man. And was able to chart a path, albeit circuitously, through the military, and then through a legal writing position, to doctrinal positions that span from Washington, D.C., Memphis, to Hawaii, to Australia, and then back to the continent. And so the advice I have on item number 2 that the professor mentioned was, say yes to everything and doubt nothing about your ability to succeed in the academy. And I was at my physical therapist the other day. I have a little knee problem. And he asked me, he said, Dean Conway, very deferential. Dean Conway, did you always have plans to be a dean? And I was like, nobody goes to sleep and dreams about becoming a dean. Who does that? And I said, no, not at all. I said, but what excited me about deaning was the ability to take responsibility for an enterprise and lead that enterprise in a way that actually adds value to our collective community. And we are included and we are substantial participants in that community. And that's why I dean, and that's why I lead. And to then go to point 1 that Professor Armour talked about, which is, how do we take these positions to actually answer those questions about critical mass in our faculty, critical mass in our student body, critical mass on our staff, our professional staff, and how do we demonstrate that the great experiment of inclusivity can actually succeed? And the way we do that is to lean on our history of those who are courageous far before the time we stepped up to plate, and who decided to not sharecrop, move instead of being cheated, who decided to, yes, flee to other places to protect liberty and to protect their bodies. And when you do that, when you channel that courage, it's not difficult to make a decision to say, hey, I think as a dean, one of my vision priorities is going to be to double the students of color in my incoming class. Only after a year of being here. Check, done. And to say, thank you. And to say that I am going to increase substantially the African American presence on the faculty. And within 6 months, hire the second African American man in the history of the institution. Unfortunately, not concurrently, but consecutively. But then to follow that up and say, one's not enough. Critical mass is a requirement. So to go deep into that courage pool and say, we have to transform the faculty. I'm happy to say that after 1 year, we have brought on board on a 25-member faculty. We have 8 people of color, 5 of whom are African American. That is standing on the shoulders of giants. There's no fear when you see the history of what was achieved before you, where people laid down their lives to provide these opportunities that we're talking about. I'll say one more thing. I had the wonderful opportunity, and I hope Dean Danielle Holly Walker, the other Dean Danielle, as they call us, the 2 Dean Danielles, I hope she talked about the AALS, the Association of American Law Schools Law Deans Anti-Racist Clearinghouse Project. And I commend that website to you because at aals.org /anti-racist-clearinghouse, you will find a statement, a collective statement from the 200 law deans in the United States of America, who after George Floyd was murdered as a result of police impunity said, we are going to demonstrate our courage and show how to change the rule of law so that it applies to all of us and so that it benefits all of us. And so I hope that you will go to that page and see how we have created an iterative process to evaluate how law schools do their work in preparing all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, each of you, for sharing in the ways that you did. And one consistent theme throughout was standing on the shoulders of others, seeing others as being brave and courageous, and also taking advantage of the opportunity and sometimes making an opportunity when an opportunity actually wasn't there. And that was really the story, Jody, of your father. There was not an opportunity. He made the opportunity to get himself out. Right. That's also, Tracy, when I hear about the story of your forebears, like making those opportunities, right? Your grandmother making the opportunity. It wasn't like someone just handed it to her. And so I'm wondering if we could start this conversation off about how does one do that when, in fact, law students, Black law students feel so deeply alienated? What's your advice about take advantage of the opportunity, make the opportunity? How do you do that in a space where students may feel as if, wow, I'm in classrooms with nobody who really looks like me in the first year curriculum? Anybody can start.
And who are looking at me many times side-eyed, askance, as if I don't belong, as if I'm there under circumstances that make me less deserving to be there than they. I remember when I was in law school, The Bell Curve was a bestseller. Murray and Herrnstein saying we were genetically Black folks, dumber than other races.
And you know what, Jody, with that too, it was very interesting, not to interrupt, but he said that too about someone who's an idol for me, Marva Collins. And he mentioned at some point, well, she must be wrong. And if you followed up on those kids, you find that they're all incarcerated. And 60 Minutes, I commend everybody to look at the 60-minute clip when 60 Minutes went back 20 years later, and they were in law school, and graduated, were doctors and teachers and all of that sort of thing. But I just needed to interject that. So I'm gonna go pitch right back to you, Jody.
No, I'm really glad that you did. That's absolutely right. That, you know, you had a real kind of push coming in that way when I'm thinking of one of the high priests of our own legal profession, Scalia, just before his death, opined that the mismatch theory was quite right, you know, which says that we Black folks shouldn't be at the law schools we're at, you know, what the upshot of that, all that is. And so to have to walk into an environment where you have that constant question mark about your abilities, right? Even though you know you're ready to shine and outshine, but you still have to deal with all of these clouds of doubt, right? And so, Claude Steele talks about stereotype, threat, and vulnerability. It drags our performance. It's a stalking beast from within. It, you know, it's really something we got to get a grip on in a variety of settings to get to where we need to go. But I would just say, leave you with this on that. Since Du Bois was mentioned earlier, I'll pick up on him, Professor Mears, because he is like, whoa, in just about everything that he has to say, and right? But when he talks about dual consciousness, I get up every morning as a legal academic thanking my stars that I'm a Black man and not anybody but a Black person. Why? Because it makes me a better scholar. It makes me a better academic. Why? Because like Du Bois says, I have to have a mastery and understanding of my own culture, of the out-group culture, and I have to master the dominant culture. You know, the one that says a lot of negative things about me, but also a lot of other stuff that I have to master and navigate my way through it. So I have to have a kind of dual consciousness all the time, which is a sort of binocular disparity that I'm bringing to every issue I encounter. And from binocular disparity comes nuance, comes depth perception. You know, when you take it to the level of somebody like Toni Morrison, she could see around corners with it. You know, I'm far from there yet, but we at least have, you know, that the cyclopses who are ensconced in their privilege can't get to or see, right? So there are a lot of blessings to Blackness, especially when it comes to creative intellectual endeavors that we need to embrace and make the most of, and not let anybody ever shake our confidence in.
Anybody want to add to that? Let me just interject just one moment, which is that, you know, I've been thinking quite a bit about Birth of a Nation. And I've been thinking about this because I think it's a really pivotal turning point in the Jim Crow narrative in the United States. You have, coming out of Reconstruction, Black folks in the United States Senate, building medical schools, medical societies, building law societies, all of these different things, right out of slavery, building communities, just as you talked about, Tracy, about the plummeting of a Black community, the pillaging. In the LA Times very recently, there was a story about a Black family, the Bruces, who bought property on Manhattan, you know, beach here, and the property would have been worth $75 million today. And there was so much racism that they experienced there. And then finally, the local municipality claimed their property through eminent domain, saying that there was an urgent need to build a park. The park wasn't built for decades and decades, but these Black people who had gotten there first and who had built a hotel and so much more right on the beach just kind of snatched away from them. And that was part of a national story. But in tying together with what you were just saying there, Jody, you know, I think about the false narrative about Black people, that false narrative about lazy, slothful, can't do anything. And of course, that doesn't reconcile with several hundred years of slavery, where Black people were building everything. We're doing all this labor and for free. Right? This kind of notion of the dangerous Black person, how could that possibly have been when there were hundreds and sometimes thousands of Black people on plantations who did not try to collect themselves and murder white people on those plantations, right? But this kind of narrative that ends up getting built after birth of a nation ends up staying and ends up affecting a nation's psyche. I just needed to add that. I think, Tracy, were you going to say something in response?
No, when you said add, I don't think there's really anything to add. I am going to say something that might be a little bit counterintuitive for some of the listeners, and that is that, I think Jody just sort of explained beautifully the duality of knowing that you have something to offer and having to master. I love the way that you put it, the binocular disparity. My caution, I guess, would be that if this is something that you want to do, I don't want students to have to wait for the person who looks like them. We're not all going to be as lucky as Dean Conway. I wasn't. There weren't even any, forget about I was the only faculty of color at the University of Chicago for 10 years of any kind, not just Black women, not like there were no other faculty of color. And there were maybe 2 women, white women on the faculty, neither of whom was my faculty member. As a first year student, I became an academic because 2 professors at the University of Chicago talked to me and said, we think you should consider doing this. And they were both white men. And not even white men that you would think would be the kind of people who would say that. So you will find your mentors, I think, in places that you don't expect to find them. And I would just encourage you to be open to that mentorship. So that's the sort of counterintuitive point. I'm sure there are many, many more people who look like us, who can be mentors to the students who are watching this webinar, as contrasted with what the situation was when the 3 of us started teaching. But, the fact that it's a little better now doesn't mean that there are many people out there. And so you should be more open, or try to be. That's all.
That's actually a really great point, right? Because, the point is, how do you land in a law school where it seems that that you may not be welcomed, or there are so few people who look like you, or, as you say, no professors of color, or maybe 1 or 2, and maybe that 1 or 2, those 2 people are so incredibly exhausted because of experiences that they've had over time, because they may have had experiences just like the student, that sometimes that mentoring comes from, or that person who's willing to give a hand up, actually doesn't look like you at all, and actually may not identify him or herself as being a liberal type, but just somebody who, may even see him or herself as being conservative on the spectrum, but just sees excellence where they see excellence, right? They just see someone who's got great potential where they see someone who has great potential. And to your point, Tracy, it was one of my law school professors, my contracts professor, that after I graduated wrote to the president of the AALS, and I don't know who else, saying, Michele Goodwin is a star that's going to be rising. You should know her, and she should be law teaching. And I know that she wrote that letter to other people and then sent me a copy of it too. It was something that I hadn't been expecting at all, but she was a great professor. And I guess I might just add, which is that if you're in the room with a great professor, you're in the room with a great professor. Get to know your professors, right? Because there may be wonderful folks who are, ready to talk to you. Dean, did you want to add anything to that before we move to our next question?
Sure. I'll just add that I actually don't think it's counterintuitive. And I do want to say, as we were connecting history, and no relationship is perfect. And that's beautiful, because it goes to Professor Armour's point of having to work in so many multifaceted ways to gain understanding. And so, you know, you can be mentored by a conservative. You can be mentored by a white man. You can be mentored by someone you never expect to build a relationship with. And a lot of it is, like you say, Professor Goodwin, is building a relationship. And we share a mutual friend in Professor David Callies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, who was my wingman at Hawaii. And he made pathways for me, and equally a partner I worked of counsel with in Hawaii, a Republican from Nebraska, Terry Thomason, who would move mountains for me because of our shared military relationship. And so it's finding a way to build connections with people and making those connections meaningful so that you can do this work, which you can do.
So another question for you all is, you mentioned your family backgrounds, and sometimes there are students who feel, alienated. Their family, some students come to law school having to work, having to send money back home to family members. The economic conditions under which students are stressed are very much real. And sometimes people come to law school without necessarily the family structures that can offer, support to them. What's your sense, with regard to how students handle that? Professor Ahmaud, you talked about your dad being away from you for a particular period of time in your life. How are students to sort of think about that, holding it together in light of the fact that sometimes, and this is not just Black students, this may be brown students, white students, anybody, come into law school and perhaps, feeling a little bit different, let's say, than other people?
Yeah, when we lost my dad, we went from basically a Cosby kid, middle class existence to crumbs and roaches and rats. And so the neighborhood we lived in, which had a homeless shelter on one corner and a high crime area on the other, Park Street intersecting Prospect, there was a lot of distractions there. There are a lot of distractions. Well, there were a lot of distractions there, which meant that if I were able to go away to school, like undergrad, where I go to a residential dorm, or to law school, where I go to away to a dormitory setting or apartment setting, I was away from that. Right now, a lot of people are having to go home and stay home and do this stuff virtually. And, that was a kind of equalizer. For me, being in a residential setting, being away at school, that got me out of some of those distractions and those stressors and pressures. Now that's even more there now, right? As an aggravating factor, reinforcing a lot of underlying social inequalities. So I'm interested in hearing what my colleagues have to say. It just really worries the hell out of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dean, how are you handling that? I mean, I'm sure this has probably crossed your mind and that of your colleagues.
Yeah, no, not cross the mind. This is what we plan for.
Well, you go, girl. Well, that's of course.
Oh, yeah. We planning for this. No, it is real. And we have done tabletop exercises and implemented a lot of feedback loops with our students using summer engagement strategies virtually, so that we know exactly where they're coming from, if they're still coming. And we actually, one of the reasons we decided to remain hybrid is because we are a small law school, and there are really big questions I want to get to, maybe not here, but also what our law school should be looking like, so that we can address the things that Professor Armour is talking about. But anyway, I'll go back to this. We're a small law school by design, and we are located in an area that, number one, is not a COVID hotspot, but number two, is affordable, absolutely affordable. Now, remaining small intentionally allows us to be optimal in how we place our students, about what kind of positions they get, experiences they have. But we are able to connect students with one another and say, even if we're hybrid and virtual, move here. You will have roommates. You will have probably less of a cost of living than you would if you stayed home. And then we are in a very, we're in a very metered community. So, you know, it's 8 blocks by 8 blocks. And that's great for me because I live in the community. I can see everybody. You know how your mom had eyes in the back of her head? Well, I do that to all our students. I'm like, I can see you. So I can reach out and touch, and they can reach out and touch me. And we take a very hands-on approach because we want students to focus on the work, not on those externalities.
So does that mean your students are coming back to campus?
They are coming back to campus. We don't have, because Penn State has 2 law schools. We are located in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Ours is the law school that is the first law school of the Commonwealth, established in 1834. So we are a law school in a neighborhood, not on a campus. Now, Dickinson College is here, but they're not coming back. They're going to be online. So we literally have this entire community to ourselves. And our law school students they're graduates and professional students. And so they are viewed very differently and positively in the community. And so the idea is that we have this close-knit community, which is real, and that we can actually lay hands on you when we need to.
Well, that makes a huge difference. So let's pivot then. And let's talk about then what law schools should be doing to address some of the concerns that students have articulated over time. So students have articulated concerns about how do you increase the, diversity and representation of students amongst the student body.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that amongst, the faculty, increase the diversity amongst the faculty? And how do you provide the resources to retain both and to create the kind of cultures where people actually want to stay and actually do thrive? So any suggestions on those things that come from your own background, your own experiences, what should law schools be doing?
I'm going to give you 3 suggestions because I don't want to give away my whole secret sauce. But but here are the 3 suggestions that I have. First, you cannot be afraid of the U.S. News and World Report methodology. You have to manipulate it. And so in manipulating it, you have to see what levers you can push. So to just focus on LSAT scores, that is not courageous. That is not the right approach. You got to focus on the entire algorithm. I love when Professor Mears was talking about calculus, because you got to focus.
Talking about numbers, wasn't she? I love it.
Yes, she was. And that's what we do. We do numbers, we do data, we do data conceptualization. We run different data sets 3 times a week. What happens if we do this? What happens if we do that? What happens if we admit these 6 people? What happens if we admit those? And then second, you've got to put out your vision priorities. And I've been teaching a lot of new deans about setting vision priorities. So you got to tell your staff and your faculty, these are my vision priorities, and this is what we're running with this year. And I'm not going to move unless I have to. So one of my top vision priorities, one of the 4, was to increase diversity substantially, especially among Black African-American students, with particular emphasis on men. I was that specific. And so my leadership team started internalizing these vision priorities. So we'd have meetings every week. And I would say, okay, what are you doing to impact my vision priority? And what are you doing? And then after about a month, they're talking to each other, and I could just sit back and watch it happen. So that's the second thing. Then the third thing is prospective students have to apply early in the cycle. And this goes to the points that were being made by our professors. You know, don't struggle thinking about the steel stereotypes, right? Stereotype threat. Apply early in the cycle. That's when the amount of money is there. That's when the admissions teams are more liberal about their admissions. Apply early. Don't wait till February. I want to strangle people. Don't wait till February. Get in there in August and September and throw that application in. That's all I'm giving out.
All right, that's all. So that nobody has all of the 10 ingredients. They just got 3 and they got to figure out the rest. Anybody want to add anything to that in terms of what law schools should be doing, what universities should be doing to increase, retain their Black student population, and also for faculty as well? And let me just add, because this came up in our prior discussion about staff. Because staff, Black staff also hold this together, all staff hold this together. But a question came up earlier about, well, what about how Black staff are treated at these institutions too? And could we give some light to that? So anybody want to add?
I'll jump in and talk about faculty and staff. I think probably a lot of the things that we have to say are going to be unique to the institution at which we're working. And so, the situation, let's say, about Black staff at Yale, where I teach now, is fundamentally different from the University of Chicago. There was a Black staff were all over the University of Chicago, and that's not true at Yale. In fact, it was one of the things that was kind of shocking to me upon coming here. I didn't really do a full visit. I did a sort of mini visit and was shocked by the fact that a city that is majority minority in terms of African American and Latinx people would have so few people of color working at the university outside of faculty and students, just in any position. This city is incredibly racially and socioeconomically segregated. And a lot of the staff people come from the surrounding suburbs, including, the C&T staff, clerical and technical staff are almost exclusively white at Yale. And we have been having a conversation about that, those of us who are really interested in it. But again, a lot of those conversations have to happen at the university level. The law school itself is not in control of it. And a lot of that has to do with union contracts and such. So it's a very important point. It's complicated and difficult because as a school, we actually don't have control over it. And then it turns out that it's incredibly important to the students themselves, because when you're looking for people who look like you disproportionately, and it was certainly true for me as a student at the University of Chicago, the staff is critical in that. On the faculty side, I would say you just have to be in it for the long haul. Too often it's an inside baseball game, which is why I was saying maybe there's this possibility of using the COVID moment and the networks that we're creating and kind of hopefully making a little bit more concrete by being online and having these conversations can help. And then I listened to Professor Armour talk about all the downsides of Zoom, and I'm like, ugh. All of that is so true. I want to keep looking to the bright side. There's a group that some of you may know, Guy Charles Uriel has created. What is it? An organization? I don't even know.
Yes,
what you want to call it. So the Colt Colloquium is for people who are already teaching, but he's back-ended it and added an emerging scholars group. And we've been trying to expand that further. Maybe he'll probably kill me now that I'm on this call. Like maybe there's a thing we can do with ACS, actually finding students who are interested early and just sort of cultivating them, just keeping in contact. You know, this is a years-long process. And knowing, I think we create the pipeline. I've given up on Yale creating a pipeline. You should know, just on this webinar, 1 out of every 11 currently teaching law professors went to Yale Law School. That to me means that Yale should be doing a hell of a lot better in terms of producing people of color and Black professors in particular, and they're not. And I know some reasons why that's true, and it has to do with the failings of my colleagues.
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything on this webinar that I have not said to people in person. You know, the fact that I am actually mentoring people on the market right now who went to Yale Law School, who were not even my students, is evidence of that. I'm also mentoring people who went to other, as Dean Conway mentioned, T14 schools, who are not my students, you know, who are killing it, right? So like, if we're gonna be the folks who are, you know, through this network, who are gonna to make this happen, then let's do it, actually. You know, let's actually make it happen, and not wait around for our colleagues to do the job that they are supposed to be doing.
It sounds like you just made it happen. Go ahead, Professor Ahmaud.
I'd say I like that a lot. I'd say there's real quickly a student and a curricular dimension to how I think perhaps students could be thinking about this moment. On the student side, this is a Black Lives Matter moment, right? The message is real clear in the streets. It's been clear for months. A lot of allies, people recognize the most maligned and marginalized people in America are Black lives, Indigenous people we basically committed genocide on and eliminated, and then Black people from slavery to now. Okay, the most maligned and marginalized. We need to do something about this particular debt, reckon with this particular issue specifically. And so I think there's more leverage right now because of the momentum and gravitas of the movement. A lot of Black students especially have more leverage than for this particular cohort right now who we're talking about right now has more leverage than who knows before, how long each way, right? So being real clear on the demands and making some serious hard demands, like right now, don't start talking about diversity in ways that erase Black lives. At my own law school, I made us think about it at the time, so they know I've already been out there on this. You know, we used to get roughly 22 Black students a year, you know, for about 15 years when I first got here. That number dropped to less than half of that for a long period of time. And at the same time, we were going around touting ourselves as one of the most, if not the most diverse law schools in the nation. Because we had, you know, once you define diversity broadly and you know, and loosely, you can make claims like that while you're erasing the Black lives that are in your classrooms, lecture halls, right? And I was saying, and look, people used to look at me, this just a few years ago. So I want to strike while the iron is hot. Look at me like, oh, well, why are you talking about those Black lives? Diversity is diversity. You know, if we have these, we should be able to celebrate it without having, no, the fact of the matter is, it's Black lives are having, you know, people like Scalia say they don't belong in these places. It's Black lives that are under assault constantly. And so more than many other student groups need a critical mass to weather all of that crap that you have to weather. You need a critical mass of Black students, which means not cutting their numbers in half, keeping a high critical mass, like again, back up to 20 plus, you know, for example, and making that case, especially for Black students who, look, you're talking about us in constitutional law, Brown and slavery and everything else, and then racial profiling and self-defense. I mean, we're constantly under the spotlight. We need critical numbers, you know, of support, inner network, you know, of support, and making that clear that you want that, you have that demand. And while you're at it, saying, hey, maybe we need to defund the police around this campus. Let's check out our allocation of resources. That's another hobby horse. I'll come back to that another time. And then finally, you know, when it comes to the kind of more curricular stuff, saying, we want these issues to be grappled with seriously in the curriculum, in the first year curriculum, in the first semester curriculum. We should be able to find it there. That's kind of where you state your priorities, what you consider important, you know, not just in your budget, but in a curriculum kind of placement. You know, first year is so critical. You know, we say a lot of times we want to get you to professional responsibility and think about professional ethics in the first year and not wait till the third year on your way out, because we want you to start thinking about it early and often. At least, you know, we did at my school. I don't know what a number of other schools did under that rationale. It should be the same thing with inclusion, diversity, and equity. Start thinking about it early, often. It should be, you know, I teach both criminal law and torts. I have no problem talking a lot about race and class and all that on those subject matters. Now, again, you don't want everybody handling these topics. There are some profs who make matters worse, and that's real. Okay, so it requires some nuance, you know, but I think we're up to the task if we make that a priority.
But, you know, as you were saying that, it's really interesting, the excellence that Black professors are held to. And the idea that, well, they're going to be just some people in mass at various law schools who just won't be able to do it, even though in so many ways, quite literally, Black people are under the gun, right? But this idea that, well, he just won't be able, or she just won't be able to teach criminal law or criminal procedure, including race, even though, you know, to such a significant degree, those people who happen to be the targets of the subject are in fact Black folk. So I want to open this discussion up as we come to our latter part to my colleague and former student, Christopher Williams, who is at the University of Chicago now, doing a PhD and is a graduate of UCI, and to lift up questions that were in our queue and also that we've had from people who've written into us.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. And I'm always appreciative of your mentorship and your support of me. So the first question we have comes from our YouTube live chat. So it says, how do we increase the percentage of students of color in law school demographics when the cost of LSAT prep, lack of mentorship / legacy, ban of affirmative action may uphold white privilege in admissions?
Who'd like to take that?
I think I talked to that. I think I gave the rundown.
Secret sauce.
The secret sauce, and you have to develop your secret sauce as a leader, and you have to then get your staff on board with your vision priorities. But you have to know the job well enough to be courageous, to make decisions that lend to building critical mass, that lend to looking more broadly at the rating system, the US News and World Report. And then at the same time, you got to fight against it, right? So not only do you have to work within it, but you also have to fight against it and create. We have created amongst the deans, and they're not all Black deans, many deans who are really tired of US News and World Report being the only ranking system. But I'll say this too, we have to look critically at the schools and their structures, and students should determine the best fit for them, not the highest ranked school. Because doing that, you are going to miss out on faculties and student bodies that will actually be quite complementary to what you want to do as a lawyer. Or if you don't want to be a lawyer, but you want to use your law degree for another purpose. So you have to look beyond ranking systems. And you have to also know that the current structure is built on a systemically racist system. So if you know that, that should give you double incentive to look beyond that, to see what schools have disrupted and transformed, and to determine whether you would be best served by that school.
And Dean, you know, one must say, one of the points that you keep coming back to, and that is certainly demonstrated by Professor Mears and also Ahmaud, is living in that space of courage, right? That courage to tell it like it is to your colleagues and to really seek understanding. And we've heard that from both of them, and we've heard that from you. And what's interesting about your position is that you've been deaning in the Northeast, and you are even further up north on the Eastern Seaboard than where you are now, still talking about courage, right? Still doing this. So it's possible. All right, Christopher.
Okay, I'm going to fuse two questions here because I think they're related and they bring up really great points. So, how do we continue to hold law schools accountable when they are hiring Black faculty and putting forth racial justice initiatives to ensure that it is not simply a placeholder or surface level action, paired with how do we do so when some of the likely responses from administrators were offer things that say, one, we can't do this because of COVID era austerity budgets. COVID is impacting our budgets basically. And two, the law school has tried to do these things before, but we struggled in the past. It's too hard to do, essentially.
I'll take that one quickly, and then please, colleagues, add in. Again, I urge people to go look at the ALS Law Dean's Anti-Racist Clearinghouse Project, because the questions you are asking are listed in our audit phase. So I will repeat myself.
They say 7 times.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it. Yeah, I think I'm saying it the 4th time now. You've got to look at an institution literally now. We are in a digital environment. You go to the webpage, you see what they are offering. You look at the list of faculty, you see who's teaching which subjects. You get in there and you ask the questions. Hey, we've been in a pandemic. What did y'all do during the summer? Well, you'll find out if you were at Penn State Dickinson Law, we did 6 teaching workshops that combine both pandemic and racial equity. And we have developed an equal protection complementary course worth 2 credits that's going to run in the first year, Professor Armour. And we are all teaching in it. So it's not the Black faculty only. And we're teaching as pods. So 2 to 3 faculty a pod. So it's more like a discussion, but we are doing it together. So you got to do the homework and say, hey, which schools are out there really talking the talk and which ones are really walking the walk?
I want to add just 2 quick things. One is echoing, what my colleagues have said. I think it's really important, and this is extra work for students, I'm sorry. But you are here at any institution for 3 years, and sometimes the demands that you make, remember when I was talking about faculty hiring, that's a years-long process. So I'm appointments chair this year, and I had a conversation with the Balsa students at Yale, and one of the things they asked for, I was like, well, we hired somebody last year to do that thing. Or, some of it is about, the ways in which there's information that you all don't often know because of the cycles of the way that hiring works. So being able to rely, if you can, on staff and student affairs and ask the right questions about, if your own predecessors in your organizations aren't getting you the information. There is institutional memory, and it's usually in the Dean of Students office / student affairs if they have student liaisons who can give you that information so that you're coming into the conversations with the deans prepared. Or if the dean has been around for a while, then you've got that institutional memory. Because remember, the appointments chairs, they're turning over every year. You all are sort of turning over every year and a half, but, and the school is sort of relying on the fact that there is all of this turnover so that they don't actually have to be accountable to you. So one piece is a little bit of homework on your part and making sure that as the leadership of your organization's turnover, that you're handing it over to them so that they don't lose ground. That's really important. Second little point is understanding the role that any law school has or plays within the entire university system. That's going to be different in different places. But in some places, law schools are incredibly independent of the university, and in other places, they're not. And actually knowing that is helpful to you, because when folks start saying, "Oh, our hands are tied because of X," you can say, we know that the law school is really independent and you always do your own thing. So, we're not listening. Or, you do have a sense that, in fact, okay, they do have constraints, but then you stop maybe complaining to the dean and go straight to the president of the university. Law school students have a ton of power, I will tell you, because they're willing to make a stink in a way that other students, whether undergrads or graduate students, don't. And at least I've seen at my university that central, as we call it, is often, well, they'll say like, they can be afraid of what the law students will do because they make a stink and it's very public. So don't be afraid to use that power.
That's a really good point about the power that students have. And when you think about it, we are in the moments following Representative John Lewis's passing. Now, I think about him not as a law student. That's not the space from which he was beaten trying to cross the Pettus Bridge. But you see young people having such enormous influence and power by speaking up and speaking out. So that's an absolutely great point. Why don't we take another question or two, Chris, and then
let me just add real briefly that if you want to add to the diversity of a law school's faculty and the student body, you're going to have to do something along these same lines, a little different. You're going to have to interrogate the metrics of evaluation. One of the things you're going to have to at least be ready for that conversation and be ready to not let them get away with their usual glib responses. Three things we're supposed to really look at, for in someone's scholarship, are rigor, relevance, and originality, right? When you're trying to assess someone's relevance, the relevance of their scholarship, is scholarly impact. Well, in weighing a scholarly impact, you just look at what fits between the pages of a law review article, or do you look at things like films? I produced a film recently, put a 22-minute out, went to film festivals around the country, wrote a play before that, right? Did a lot of other stuff that made impacts with my ideas, but don't fit between the covers of a law review. When you're weighing scholarly impact, are you discouraging scholars interdisciplinarily, as truly exuberantly interdisciplinary scholars like myself, from even entering the fray because you say it, but you don't mean it? And so insisting that they look at scholarly impact and therefore reevaluate their metrics of evaluation, their metrics of excellence, recognize that more diverse kinds of faculty members can have different kinds of impacts in different arenas that could still count as part of their overall relevance, the relevance of their ideas and the originality of their ideas and that sort of thing. But, and that's real basic, and we gotta be ready for that fight, just like we gotta be ready for that same fight when it comes to admitting students. And what are the criteria of admission? How much, which of those criteria are we ready to fight about? And once we're ready to fight about them, and because they do have some predictive value to some extent, and we get in more diverse students because we're able to interrogate the criteria of evaluation for admitted students, we have to make sure that those students are supported while they're there so that they go out with the skill sets that will make it possible for them to get through that bar, which is a bear, and do what they need to do. And that may involve academic support programs and the like that are fashioned not to be stigmatizing to their participants and beneficiaries, because you can fashion them in so many ways, and so often we fashion them in stigmatizing ways. So yeah, I think this is a moment that you have the leverage to make a lot of those kinds of demands.
All right, so I'm looking at our time here, and I want to be mindful of you all and our guests. Chris, let's pull up one more question. We'll take this one really quick, and then we'll move towards closing. I really appreciate what you all just said, too, in terms of thinking in nuanced ways that law schools have to do that, right? Because there's potential that's untapped all around, right? And we know this through history so much. We could do a session just on potential untapped. So, Christopher.
Yeah, really quick. I think this question could be potentially geared towards the Balsa folks on the call. And it says, on my campus, issues of racism, exclusion, and discrimination were often only discussed during Balsa events. It was frustrating to find that most times our events were only attended by people who already understood many of the issues around which the event centered. Any suggestions for helping other students understand why their investment in and understanding of these issues is so crucial?
That's a great question. It touches on issues that we see throughout our local chapters of BOSA generally just being a gathering place, a family gathering for Black law students on campus, the few that are on campus. And it's a little bit of folks working to display and disperse a huge message around a campus. And one of the things that I found, I'm on a smaller campus with a smaller BOSA chapter as well. And one of the things that we do is partner a lot with other organizations on events. And that is not solely for events, though. It looks in terms of like, how do we build and develop leadership together? We're all student leaders on this campus. How do we facilitate different trainings and things that are not necessarily tied to our organization? So not if we do a partnership with the Veterans Organization or Outlaw, which is our LGBTQ organization, what can we do beyond just the events, beyond the panels and the free food events that are going to get folks out? How do we start to, one, pour into our members that are part of the organization so that they're tied into the organization beyond the mission of that organization itself, but also putting pressure on your administration to support your organizations beyond the walls of your campus. So there's a lot of opportunities through Nabalsa, whether it be conventions or right now virtual programming, or partnerships that we have with other similar organizations that you just will not get on a regular campus. So a Nabalsa convention is unlike any other organization or event that you can attend on campus, but it costs for travel, it costs for hotels, it costs for if you're going to compete. So making sure that you're, one, building those relationships with your administration and making sure that they're buying into the opportunities outside of your campus. So you're going to have to sell outside opportunities of being a part of Nabalsa leadership. One of the things that we do as soon as we bring on new executives or board members, we give them a letter to take straight to their dean, saying, these are our 5 in-person meetings. We're going to need travel for this. We would love your support so that I can continue to develop and grow, not only as a law student, but as a leader within the community. And then opportunities will arise that will then add to the local chapter of BOSA. And then once your administration starts to buy in, they'll promote more and buy more into your local chapter's events. And just thinking creatively on how to partner with other organizations on campus as well.
Agreed. Briefly, I would say that 2 big things, as Marquisa mentioned, are collaboration and exposure. And then a third would be accountability from allies. So when it comes to local chapters, a lot of times you don't have the bodies, the Black and brown bodies to advocate for yourselves by yourselves, which is why leaning on allies and holding allies accountable is very important, because a lot of times people say, oh, if you need anything, let me know, or if I can ever be of support. Well, now you can be of support. We're having issues where we're not getting enough attendees, or we're not getting enough eyes on our programming to be successful or make an impact, and that's where you hold them accountable. When it comes to collaboration, like Marquisa mentioned, working with other clubs, other organizations at the university, not just within the law school, for example, because a lot of the issues that Black law students face are faced by Black people in the community, people of color, overall marginalized individuals. So collaborating and being creative with how you gain that exposure is important. And then for the last piece, you know, I spoke a little bit about this on the last talk we had, but trying to make it safe for allies or people who might be on the fringe of just the cusp of wanting to do more, giving them safe environments to kind of identify themselves. Not every program has to be topical for people, especially allies, to get involved or engage, because once they see, oh, these are just regular people, which we are, you know, it makes it a lot easier for them to buy into the next event and the next event. And so those are the ways that we hope you guys are able to engage. And also at Nabalsas is always available. We have members at large dedicated to the support exclusively of local chapters. And that also goes back to the pre-law statements that were mentioned. We have partnerships with different LSAT prep companies, large and small, in an effort to give our members resources to reduce the barriers that hold us back at 5% representation when we should be much more. And then we also have the same support for our law students as well when it comes to bar prep.
Thank you so much for that. This has been such an engaged conversation. I want to ask if our professors and dean have just a quick closing comment to make, and then we're going to close out with Christopher Williams.
Quick, okay, you got me under pressure. Here I go. Here goes quick for me. I tell my students that there are 4 occupations in America whose bread and butter is word work: writers, poets, lawyers, and rappers. And, you know, I think that as word workers, you know, which is one of the reasons I'm kind of drawn to rap, by the way, but as word workers, we can really, in the words of, let me just put it this way, these will be my last words on this, because you know, with my dad in the room, with the typewriter behind me, my last words have to be about word work. So Toni Morrison says, and the queen is the one you have to finish anything about word work with, you know, you have to finish it with Toni Morrison, in my humble opinion. She said, we die, that may be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of our lives. And I think that's a proud profession that we belong to, and we can make the frozen circumstances dance, like my dad said, by playing to them their own melody.
Thank you so much for that. Dean?
I'm known for my brevity. The rule of law belongs to all of us. That means the obligation as well as the benefits. Be part of the collective community that promotes the rule of law and see yourself in it, because we need you.
Thank you so much for that. And Professor Mears?
Do I have to add anything?
You don't, because, but I mean, they were just dropping it, right? From poetry to brilliant quotes from, right.
What they said, and I hope the ACS's participation in this can actually leverage some of these ideas. You know, let's make this virtual connection something real. I would like to see 5 years from now, because it will take that long, that actual fruit from this. So it's on you, ACS. You guys have resources. Let's do this.
I love that. And I love the suggestion that you made earlier with regard to the program that Guy is operating and ACS being involved in that. That's brilliant. It's been a pleasure to be with you this evening, and I'm really proud to have this program close out with Christopher Williams. Chris.
Thank you. Thank you again for inviting me. And as always, as has been said before, Professor Goodwin is a mentor of mine, and I'm always appreciative of her. And one of the things that I learned being Professor Goodwin's mentee is that history and context matters. And in this moment, an important moment we live in light of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, Tony McDade, oftentimes people have, I think, been wondering, what is it that we can do in this moment? A moment which feels paralyzing, a moment which feels like nothing is the answer. And I implore you all, everybody on this call, to think of history and lineage. And that is that we must continue to have our joy and we must continue to fight. As we think of law students, what this means for law students, for you, what we need from you in this time is to complete the mission. That is to follow through, to continue law school, to graduate. We need your voices, as our dean so eloquently said. We need you in those spaces. That's what your fight is. That's what your joy is during this moment. We need you, we want you, and you're important. To people who, like me, are alumni or faculty, folks who are no longer in law school, but connected to the legal sphere, we have to continue to fight on behalf of law students, but on behalf of ourselves as well, right? Because our voices are important and we have to continue to have that joy. And for allies, I think this is a pivotal moment for you too. Are you going to be an ally who justifies what happened to George Floyd, who justifies what happened to Breonna Taylor, who would have justified slavery? Or are you going to be the person who's going to stand with us, right? And who's going to say slavery was wrong? Who's going to say that what happened to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, Tony McDade, or discrimination at law schools is wrong? You have to ask yourself that question, right? That moment, that fight is yours. But I implore you, as we've all said on this call, we know what side of history we need you on, right? As I stood earlier today looking at a photo of my family member who was a slave. They were slaves, and I have other family members who were sharecroppers. And I looked at that photo and I thought of Professor Goodwin, and I thought of history again. And that is to say that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams, right? Because in that moment, they fought to survive, right? So I could be here, so I could continue fighting, and that so I may have joy today, right? They did that for me. And as all of our as we've all had family members who've laid down our life so that we may continue to fight, so that we may continue to have joy, it's only right that we continue that tradition as we are still here when George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Tony McDade, Elijah McClain could not be here. So I implore you today on this call to continue to fight and to continue to have joy.
Thank you so much for that. You know, isn't it wonderful? You just know your folks are listening to you. Thank you, Christopher. That was a brilliant way of closing out this program. Thank you all so much for joining us for this American Constitution Society event to elevate Black lives and Black lives on law school campuses. That's it for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Peace.